So you may have noticed that all the cool kids are using ox bile or TUDCA supplements. And the reality is that I would say that probably 98% of the people that are using these supplements are using them incorrectly. And though there's a lot of benefits that can come from using these supplements, a lot of these people are actually making their situation worse. So we're going to kind of help you straighten that situation out today and help you understand what we're actually trying to do when we're using ox bile or TUDCA. And TUDCA is basically a synthetic version of a purified bile salt. It was TUDCA they got from bears, and they're like, oh man, we're killing off all the bears, so let's make a synthetic form. And that's basically what you're finding when you're getting TUDCA today, as a synthetic form. So we're not going to use these interchangeably like most people do. We're going to talk a little bit about who might want to use one and who might want to use the other in specific situations. But to understand what we're even trying to do, we need to understand what bile does in the body. Because when people are supplementing with these, they're trying to get the benefits of bile. So bile is this soapy substance that's made up here in the liver, and then it comes down here and it's stored in the gallbladder. And bile helps us emulsify or break down our dietary fats. And that's really important to be able to break those fats down so that the body can use them. Because if they can't be broken down, they kind of rot and they become fermented and they become rancid and they become a burden for the body. Now the body's got to figure out, hey, what do I do with all this garbage? So we really want to emulsify our dietary fats. So bile is very important for that purpose. It also helps us access the fat-soluble vitamins in our food, all the A, D, K, E. These things are very important for the body to function correctly. So bile, when it's helping us emulsify our dietary fats, it helps us access those fat-soluble vitamins. The other thing that helps us do is it helps us neutralize the acids. So here's what's happening when we digest. We eat the food and then it's acidified in the stomach. And then when that acidified product leaves the stomach and comes down into this duodenum, that's when the gallbladder squirts the alkaline bile down into the duodenum, where the acid product from the stomach comes down, and then they meet, and then that creates this sizzle. So it's an acid product meeting an alkaline product, and when those opposite pHs hit, it creates this sizzle, like if you were to put baking soda and vinegar together. It kind of makes that volcano like everybody made in the 3rd grade that was so stupid. But that sizzle is what we're living off of. That sizzle is what helps us really bust the food apart and access the nutrients in the food we're eating. That's why we eat the food, to get the nutrients out of that food. So this ability to neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach is one of the biggest aspects of bile. That's one of the things that really helps us with our digestive process. Now, bicarb coming from the pancreas is another alkaline substance that helps us neutralize a little bit as well, but we really need the bile to properly create that sizzle and digest our food correctly. Now, supplementing with ox bile could also help with some bile production for some people, and that's what everybody thinks. Oh, if you're not producing enough bile, just supplement with ox bile and then it'll stimulate your body to make more bile. And that's accurate. The problem is not producing enough bile is the problem for a very small percentage of the population. The problem for most people is that the bile becomes too thick and sticky to flow correctly, and then it's not coming down to help us neutralize the acids leaving the stomach. It's not coming down to help us really digest our food correctly. There's a lot of things in our world that can thicken up the bile so it won't flow correctly. So it's not that the person isn't producing enough bile, it's that the bile has become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. So what we're going to do here is we're going to help understand why this is a big problem, because when the liver is producing this bile up here, it's taking a lot of the toxins that it filters out of the body and it puts it in that bile, so that when the bile flows down here and comes down the intestinal tract, it continues through this whole intestinal pathway and it's carrying those toxins out the back door when we poop like a champion. So when the bile isn't flowing correctly, this detox pathway is not working correctly. Now the liver is filtering all this junk and it's putting it in the bile, but the bile is not carrying it out the back door and all those toxins get reassimilated. So now the system becomes toxic. So here's what we're going to talk about today, is we're going to talk about how to use these supplements correctly and who should even be using them. Some people should not be using them at all. So we're going to break that down and help you guys use these the right way and get the real benefits from them. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So here's the biggest problem that we see. We're told that we should take ox bile or TUDCA with our meal to help us process the fats in that meal a little bit better. Well, here's the problem. We just learned how when we eat food and it goes in the stomach, that's where the food needs to be acidified. So if someone can't acidify their food correctly, even if their bile is flowing fine, they're not going to create that sizzle. They're not going to bust the food apart and get all the nutrients out of that food. The food needs to be acidified in the stomach. Then when it comes out, then the bile comes down and it neutralizes those acids. If it doesn't neutralize them, then these acids continue through the intestinal tract and they'll basically break down the intestinal tract. That creates a lot of problems like loose stools and a whole bunch of other trouble. So this is great. We want the bile to do that. But if we're putting the bile through our stomach, what are we doing? We're neutralizing it before it has the chance to acidify. We're doing something in the stomach that's supposed to happen outside of the stomach. The trick is that we don't have a way to supplement with ox bile into our duodenum. We don't have a way to shove that in there. Our only option is to take it orally and have it go through the stomach. So the only people that we like to see supplement with ox bile are the people who have lost this gallbladder. They don't have this gallbladder option to have the thing work correctly. So it's been removed, so now the only option they have is to take it in the stomach. So when we're going to do that, we want to take the ox bile away from the food. We want to allow the food to come in to acidify for 60, 90, maybe 120 minutes, and then put the ox bile in to help neutralize those acids so that the acids don't go screaming through the intestinal tract. So the timing could vary from person to person. So the timing of the dose is really going to be an important factor for some people to kind of test out what's going to work best for them. And it could depend on how much stomach acid are you making, how quickly are you acidifying that food, and then what kind of symptoms are you having. If you're having like bloating or constipation or acid reflux, these are all signs of a lack of stomach acid. So a person might need to actually supplement with some betaine HCl to acidify the stomach correctly. And then once the food is acidified, then they could put in the ox bile, which will help neutralize those acids. But we see all these manufacturers making all these dietary supplements that have like HCl and ox bile all in them together with digestive enzymes that you're supposed to take with your meal. But it's like driving your car with your foot slammed down on the gas and your other foot slammed down on the brake at the same time. If you ever tried that, I'll let you know it doesn't go that great. So we really want digestion to work in a way that nature has intended. If we're neutralizing all of our acids before we have the ability to acidify our food, then when the food comes out, it's not really broken down, and it's this acidification process that actually triggers these other things to happen, that actually trigger the bile to come down to neutralize those acids. It triggers the pancreas to squirt that bicarb and other digestive enzymes down to come help us digest our food correctly. So if we never acidify the food, we're really breaking down the whole digestive process. So taking ox bile in the middle of a meal is a really big problem. So now let's look at the difference between using these two. So both of them seem to help us emulsify our fats, which is really beneficial. We really want to do that. They both seem to have the ability to help us access those fat-soluble vitamins, but only ox bile appears to have the ability to help us neutralize those acids. A lot of people say that the TUDCA does not interfere with stomach acid, so you can take it with a meal. And that also means that it's not giving us the benefit of neutralizing the acids once the food has been properly acidified. So let's say that someone was having a trouble where every time they ate fats, they really got nauseous because they couldn't digest and break down those fats correctly. Well, they could test out using some TUDCA with the meal to see if that helps them digest those fats better. And if it does, then that could be beneficial, and that might be something that someone did without a gallbladder. But again, if you have your gallbladder, you really want to fix that function. You really want to fix the ability for bile to flow correctly. Because if you're just going to say, oh, I'm just going to use ox bile instead, then you may get the benefits that you get from emulsifying the fats and all that kind of stuff. If you time it right, you may be able to neutralize the acids and create a little bit of a sizzle. But you've removed the whole detox pathway. You want that detox pathway working. So if you have your gallbladder, you want to check out our video on 5 steps to thin bile and get that flowing correctly so that you can have the digestive process work the way that it's supposed to work, the way that nature intended. So the scenarios we like to see people use ox bile is if they've lost their gallbladder, or if they are not producing enough bile, which is quite rare, or maybe if they're having gallbladder attacks or they're having gallstones that they're trying to clear out, then there's a chance that they're not producing enough bile, and the small amount that they're producing is just kind of staying in the gallbladder and continuing to concentrate into stones. So you want to put everything you can in your favor when you have gallstones. So check out our video on how to save a gallbladder, and those folks might want to take some ox bile while they're working on getting rid of the pain in their gallbladder and getting rid of those gallbladder attacks and trying to, soften those stones up, because you really need flow happening to get rid of those gallstones. So that's a scenario where we like to see people use ox bile. But if someone still has their gallbladder, we want to see them fix the stuff so that it works naturally. Now, if you do need to use ox bile in one of those other circumstances, then you really want to work on the timing and the dose of that ox bile. So if you're finding that your stool is too loose, that's a sign that you might need to increase ox bile. Now, a lot of people tell us that you shouldn't take ox bile when your stool is loose because ox bile is like this lubricant that helps things move a little bit easier. And that is true in a petri dish. But we have to remember that ox bile is also alkaline. And the more alkaline a stool is, the slower it will move through the system. A lot of chronic constipation issues, not all, but a lot, are caused by someone doesn't have enough stomach acid to acidify their food correctly, so then that stool is too alkaline and it moves very slowly. So if someone has chronic diarrhea because they've lost their gallbladder and bile isn't coming down here to neutralize the acids, so now the acids are screaming through the system, then using ox bile can really help them correct that. But again, you don't want to take it with your meal. You want to take it after the food has had time to acidify. Some people even do well when they're adjusting this timing to take ox bile in between meals, to let it go through the stomach when there isn't food in there so that it can move through a little faster and get into the intestinal tract and help slow those acids down and slow the stool down. And then only if it seems that the person might have low stomach acid where they want to supplement with some betaine HCl with the meal and then use the ox bile away from the meal. You can check out our video on 10 signs of low stomach acid to see if you think you might have some troubles there. The other thing to consider when you're thinking like which one of these should we use, I really like to use more towards nature when I can. And the other problem with TUDCA is that it appears that it has the ability to interfere with apoptosis, and that's basically the natural cell death process. And people hear, oh, cell death. Oh, I don't want cell death, so I'm going to take me some TUDCA to interfere with that. But the apoptosis is the natural process of cells breaking down so the body can get rid of old cells and then rebuild and renew the body. So we really want that process to happen. There are situations where maybe people are breaking down too much in what we call a catabolic imbalance, but for the most part, we want that apoptosis process working correctly. So when we have clients use TUDCA, we do it just because they're really feeling nauseous when they're consuming fats, and they might need a little bit of help during that meal to help them process those fats a little bit better. And that's usually a temporary situation. As they improve their digestion, that situation should improve on its own. So we'll have the links to those other videos that we mentioned in the description below this video, but you can see that once you understand how digestion works, you can see that taking ox bile with your meal and turning off the acidification process can be a real problem. So what I want you to do right now is that if you have lost your gallbladder, jump over and watch our video on steps that can help if you've lost your gallbladder. But if you have your gallbladder, you want to watch our video on 5 steps to improve bile flow so you can help the digestive process work the way that it should. I can't wait to hear about your results.